Banjo-Kazooie is one of my favorite games on not just the N64, but in general. It's just a really well designed and charming game within the collectathon genre. It's the game that made me get my N64, while before I was content with playing those games on the system through the Wii Virtual Console. That being said, I have never beaten the game's sequel until this video. When I first got Banjo-Tooie, I was really into it. In fact, I think it was one of my favorite games ever at the time. But that changed very quickly. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's because I was in a weird point in my life where my opinions and everything was just changing dramatically out of nowhere. But that love did not last long at all. Yeah, I don't like Banjo-Tooie. I jumping the gun a bit here, but I love the original game. Don't like the sequel. In fact, this video is the first time I've ever even beaten it. And this is going to be basically me explaining my very conflicting opinions on this game, because believe it or not, I do love a lot of things about this game, just not the right things. Just like my Banjo-Kazooie video, I was playing this game through the Xbox 360, which has a remastered version. This one's a lot more mandatory than the previous game because, man, that frame rate. Banjo-Tooie runs absolutely horribly on the original N64. It's not unplayable, but it is pretty gross looking. Playing this at a full 60 FPS for the first time was kind of a surreal experience for me. Aside from that, it's now 1080p and actually the original already had a widescreen option, so that's not an addition this time around. Pretty cool to see that. Widescreen was incredibly rare in this generation. So yeah, just like Banjo-Kazooie, this is easily the definitive version. I'll talk about a few differences later, just know it probably won't be as in-depth as my review of the original game because I just know that game far better. Banjo-Tooie's story is a lot more interesting than the first games. It takes place a whole 2 years after the original, with Klungo still trying to move that boulder aside that Grungy got stuck under in the first game. Meanwhile, Banjo, Kazooie, Bottles, and Mumbo are all playing a game of cards, while Klungo continues to try to move the boulder aside. Grunty's sisters Blabelda and Minjella drive a giant drill through Spiral Mountain's walls. This causes a mini earthquake, which makes Mumbo briefly leave the card game to investigate. When Mumbo arrives, he sees Grunty's sisters use their magic to move the boulder and free Grunty. Being stuck under a boulder for 2 years caused Grunty to decompose over time, so she has no skin. She doesn't like this, and the sisters tell Grunty they'll talk about it at their castle, Cauldron Keep. Grunty eventually spots Mumbo and chases him back to Banjo's house. Mumbo warns everyone that Grunty is still alive and is about to blow up the house. Everyone besides Bottles leaves, causing Bottles to die. After not much mourning, Banjo and Kazooie set out to get revenge on Grunty and hopefully bring Bottles back to life. After leaving Spiral Mountain by entering the hole Grunty's sisters made, they find themselves in the Isle of Hags. Just looking around, you can tell that Grunty's sister left a trail of destruction, even killing an entire family of Jinjos. Banjo and Kazooie quickly talk to King Jingling, the king of the Jinjos. He tells Banjo and Kazooie that the giant machine scared away all of the Jinjos in Jinjo Village and he needs them back for an upcoming kickball tournament. Only the highest of stakes, I know. He then gives them a Jiggy so they can progress further and save the Jinjos, and he sends them to Jiggy Wiggy, the leader of an ancient and secret order, or at least that's what the game says. Basically, he's the dude that'll open up future levels if you have enough Jiggies. While this is happening, Grunty and her sisters are coming up with a plan to give Grunty her body back. They decide to use this machine called BOB, or Bob. It's a machine that's meant to harvest life force out of things and people. Didn't Sonic Lost World use this exact same idea? Whatever. They quickly test it out on King Jingling, causing him to become a zombie. And gossip. The rest of the game is about Banjo and Kazooie reaching Cauldron Keep before Bob charges all the way up and does more substantial damage. This story is definitely a lot darker and more complex than the original. Bottles dies. Yeah, spoiler alert, he comes back. Not hard to figure that out, so whatever. But that Jinjo family? No, they're dead and that doesn't change. Seeing Spiral Mountain all destroyed adds a lot too. It's such a happy and cheerful place in the original, but it's in such horrible shape in this game. It even has a much slower and somber remix of the Spiral Mountain theme playing, a song that's incredibly happy sounding in the original. I know it sounds strange, but I really like this darker tone. I just love when I see otherwise happy cartoony games have dark things sprinkled into them. This story is just a lot more interesting than the originals overall. The original story served its purpose fine, but it didn't do much beyond that. Heck, the character Tootie existed specifically to give the characters motivation, and this game pretty much proves that because Tootie isn't in it at all. Banjo-Tooie's is far more interesting, and it's so cool to see the world slightly beyond Spiral Mountain. I do have one major issue with it though. Grunty. Okay, I love the concept of having Grunty's appearance reflect that she's been beaten before, and this trend actually continues in later games, but early on, one of her sisters tells her to stop rhyming, and she does? It kind of zaps away a ton of her charm, and that was the reason why I loved her character so much. I used to think this was because Banjo-Tooie is a much more story-focused game, so writing that much dialogue that all rhymes probably wouldn't be worth the effort. But after actually playing through the whole game myself, I don't think that's the case. The game definitely has more story, but Grunty is really only in the first and last couple cutscenes. Aside from being sprinkled into one or two levels, you don't really see Grunty anywhere in between. It's so weird they decided to ditch something that added so much to her character when the rest of the game has such strong writing. The first game made me chuckle a few times, but Tooie actually got me laughing pretty hard at points. Kazooie is much meaner in this game and I love it. She basically says, no one liked him anyway, immediately after Bottles dies. I love her extreme sarcasm to some of the NPCs throughout the game, and I really loved how she and Banjo dance around Bottles' death when they're talking to his family. I think my favorite joke is when you meet this female Ice Cube in HALFIRE Peaks, and she tells you that her husband got sucked up in a tornado and launched somewhere high up. And she'll give you the Jinjo if you find him. You eventually do find her husband in Cloud Cuckoo Land, and he asks you to just push him down because he thinks he's going to land in the icy half of HALFIRE Peaks. And he was wrong. At this point, I wasn't sure how to get that Jinjo, so I went back. It turns out you just have to murder her. Oh, and shout out to the fast food employee in Witchy World that says, "I hate customers always wanting things." The characters in this game are pretty great overall. I love how a few of them are references to Rare's past, like you see Saberman in HALFIRE Peaks. He was the main character in one of Rare's older games, but then you have Black Eye, who was the main antagonist in the cancelled game that eventually became Banjo-Kazooie Project Dream. He even mentions how he had a dream, but then a bear stole his glory. There's a few returning NPCs from the first game, like Boggy and his kids. This time Boggy is even more neglectful and one of his kids is more bald than Bear. Oh, and I can't forget about Gobi. You initially free him out of the jail cell in Witchy World, and he later appears in the fire half of HALFIRE Peaks. I love how even after going to the destination he set out to go to in the original game, he still gets assaulted by Banjo and Kazooie. Oh, you thought you were safe? Gobi will continue to be harassed by these two until the day he dies. There's a ton of really great NPCs in this game. Those were just the highlights for me. The gameplay is kinda like the first games, being a collectathon 3D platformer, except there's way more to everything. The controls are mostly the same, but they have seen some improvements, like the camera doesn't have that weird snapping around thing, flying feels a lot smoother, and the swimming controls are so much better. Like, I can actually control Banjo! Considering they have a level that's basically entirely underwater, this is a very, very good thing. I know it's not exactly related to the controls, but I don't know where else to put this, so you also can't see through Banjo's leg while he's flying around like you do in the original. That really bothered me. I don't know why I didn't bring it up in that video. Aside from that, levels are bigger, jiggies take longer, challenges often span across multiple levels, and the collectibles work a bit differently. Jiggies open up levels like they did in the previous game, except this time around you need to play these puzzle challenges. They're kinda like the ones from the first game, except they don't get nearly that hard. Which, oh my god, thank you. Jinjos come in families now. Instead of needing every Jinjo in a level to get a Jiggy, you need to save an entire family of Jinjos, meaning you're probably not getting any Jiggies from Jinjos until somewhat late into the game. Empty honeycomb pieces also work a bit differently. You need to take them to Honeybee to get any upgrades for your health, and the early upgrades don't require many empty honeycomb pieces, But the more upgrades you've earned, the more empty honeycomb pieces you need for later upgrades. Notes are back and you need them to unlock more moves from these silos, but they hardly exist this time around. They come in bunches of 5 or even 20, meaning there's far less of them, and it kinda makes the levels feel a lot more empty than the original games. Well, okay, there's a lot of other reasons why these levels feel more empty, but you get what I mean. These things have such a smaller focus than the first game's notes that I ended up getting all 100 notes in the first level in less than 2 minutes. A level that took me almost an hour to 100%. I almost feel like they don't really need to be in this game if they're gonna be that easy to get. And finally, we have Cheeto pages. I didn't bring up Cheeto in the first game, but he was basically a living book that would give you cheat codes if you found him hidden in Grunchy's lair. They weren't exactly cheat codes, but more so upgrades. Like, you could hold more red feathers or eggs. Cheeto works a bit differently in this game. He's always in Grunchy's abandoned lair, and he'll only give you cheats if you give him 5 Cheeto pages. The earlier cheats are similar to the ones you see in the first game, like holding double the amount of eggs or feathers, but they do get a bit more cheaty, like eliminating fall damage, which isn't too broken, but then you have Honeyback, which refills your health so fast it might as well be infinite health. I kind of felt bad for using this one, but I feel like I earned it after a certain Cheeto page in this game I'm going to get into later. Oh, will I get into that? As for the actually important characters, other than Cheeto, because of the whole dead thing, Bottles isn't around to teach Banjo-Kazooie new moves. Instead, we have his military brother, Jam Jars, which, fun fact, was actually one of Kazooie's insults towards Bottles in the first game. I love how his response to hearing that his brother died is just pretty much, oh well. Does anyone like Bottles? Anyway, you actually don't have to relearn any moves from the first game. Instead, you have an entirely new set of moves, along with the ones from the first game. Some of them just expand on moves from the first game, while others are entirely new, like Banjo learns how to use Kazooie as a gun. I don't really like first-person shooters at all, but I kinda love this. It's so out of nowhere and I can't help but love it. Aside from that stupid Glitter Gulch Mine one, it never really gets all that hard, and that's coming from someone who's pretty bad at this genre. And considering FPSs couldn't be further from platformers, I appreciate that. You also get the ability to split up Banjo and Kazooie and play them separately. They get their own set of moves, like Kazooie actually learns how to glide, though you don't learn this move until very late in the game, which kinda sucks. I feel like it's such a disappointingly underutilized move. Kazooie has a lot more control over her glide than Spyro does, and considering Spyro does a lot of cool things with the glide, I'm positive they could have thought of some pretty cool stuff with this. And they kinda did, but again, you get this move so late in the game that you barely see it. Kazooie is just generally a lot more agile on her own, since she isn't lugging a giant bear around. She can jump much higher, run much faster, which this game does occasionally make use of. Banjo doesn't use any bear-related moves like you might expect. Instead, all of them relate to using his backpack, but I guess it would be kinda weird to see Banjo violently maul someone to death. Anyway, he can do things like carry people around in his backpack, recharge his health by taking a nap, and hopping into himself to avoid taking damage. Why isn't it working? Hold down one of the triggers while pressing down on the right analog stick. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. What? Why? So this is easily the most irritating thing that's ever happened to me in a video. For some reason, the Xbox Live Arcade version of Banjo-Tooie does not like my right analog stick, specifically the up and down inputs. It's not my controller. I use that controller for a lot of games, and Banjo-Tooie is the only one that gives me any issues. I don't know why. I've never experienced this with any video game before, but Banjo-Tooie hates it. And and it was honestly kind of scary. At this point, I was like 15 hours in the game, and I was genuinely terrified there would be one move in the entire game that would prevent me from getting 100%. And that thought actually it frustrated me to say the least. However, I was able to get around it using this. It's a PlayStation to Xbox 360 adapter that I got a few years ago. By a few, I mean 4. And I used my PlayStation 1 controller with it, and it worked. I don't know why, but it worked. So I played an N64 game on an Xbox 360 using a PlayStation 1 controller. Weird. You only use this move in another one very similar to it for maybe 2 jiggies in the whole game. Can you imagine if that really did end up screwing me out of 100%? Good thing I bought that thing like 4 years ago. You even learn how to shoot other kinds of eggs. There's fire, ice, grenade, and clockwork eggs. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory, except for the clockwork eggs. These things are pretty cool. Kazooie shoots out a tiny robotic baby bird that you can take control of and make it detonate at any point. It's a lot of fun to use, but it's really only used in one level and sparingly afterwards. I like the idea of different kinds of eggs, but not all of them are treated equally. I swear the ice egg's sole purpose is just to slow you down by making you freeze these octopi in Jolly Roger's Lagoon. I already don't like this level very much. It's so slow paced, but then they have this in between every major area, and sometimes I just want to tank through it. There's also Humba Wumba, a Native American character who's the one behind the transformations this time around. Instead of asking for Mumbo tokens, she asks for Globos, which are these small creatures that are never all that far from Wumba's wigwam in any given level. This time, every level has one transformation, and they're a lot better than the originals. The original game's transformations aren't bad, but they didn't really do much for me either. They all felt the same and didn't really add much. This is not the case this time around. Each one of them are very distinct from one another. The Stony is pretty similar to something you'd see in the first game, but I don't mind it nearly as much because there's a lot more to it, in that you disguise yourself to play against other Stonies in the Kickball tournament. There's also the Bee, which was actually in Banjo-Kazooie, and that was easily the best transformation, so it's cool to see it back, now with the ability to shoot stingers out of your nose. Alright. The T-Rex and washing machine were also both in Banjo-Kazooie, but they were just an Easter egg meant to tease this game. The T-Rex isn't used too much, really just to scare a caveman and to open up a couple doors, but it's still a cool transformation. I think the way they handled having 2 sizes was pretty clever. I'm not really a fan of the washing machine though, but that's mostly because of the level it's in. You have much more limited mobility and can't go to the same area, so the challenge comes from trying to figure out how to get everywhere. Probably the coolest one would be the snowball, because its size depends on how much health you have. So you sometimes have to take damage intentionally to fit in smaller holes or roll around in the snow to grow in size and gain health so you can press large buttons. There's even a permanent transformation in the form of Dragon Kazooie. You get this by finding a giant Globo and giving it to Wumba in the hub world. It just allows her to shoot infinite fire eggs and breathe fire. I didn't use this at all purely because I don't like the way she looks as a dragon, and I just didn't see these things being a big advantage, but I thought it was worth bringing up. There's also the submarine, but you use it for one quick mini game and never again, so I completely forgot it existed while writing this script. The only transformations I straight up don't like were the truck and especially the dynamite. The truck sounds cool, but it's really only used to open up these doors, and that is really lame. Like, okay, I know when you get down to it, that's what the other transformations do a lot too, but they at least have a vastly different experience, had unique things that only that transformation can do and were fun, or were just really clever. I would accept the truck just fine if they had you race around Witchy World or something, but as is, the truck is really only there for the sake of blocking up large chunks of the level until you find that Globo. The dynamite is far more guilty of this. The truck was at least a powerhouse, but the dynamite sucks so hard that it takes damage whenever you try to attack. You only use it to blow up rocks and that's it. It's not remotely fun to play as. The sole objective you have isn't fun or challenging, so just like the truck, it's just busy work. The term busy work is actually a really good way to describe this game, honestly, and that leads into Mumbo perfectly. You can actually play as Mumbo this time around. Just like Wumba, you'll need to give him a Globo to get him to do anything. His moveset is very limited, he can really only jump around and use a stinky little staff to slowly kill enemies. The reason you'd want to play as him is because he can use his magic to do anything from making water breathable to resurrecting the dead. Sounds cool, right? It really isn't! From a gameplay perspective, it's almost always just going to a Mumbo pad and pressing B. Sometimes there'll be multiple pads in one level, sometimes there will only be one. Sometimes you'll have to use the same pad more than once, but other times you won't. This isn't fun or interesting at all, it's just another thing to add to the list of boring stuff to check off that checklist. To its credit, it does get interesting in the first level where you get to take over the mind of this golem, or how in Pterodactyl Land it can be kind of a puzzle to figure out how to get Mumbo there in the first place, but those are the only exceptions. Every other time you'll immediately know what to do when you see a Mumbo pad. There's no puzzle, no challenge, and no fun. It's honestly more of a chore than anything, and I think it's not a stretch to say at all that this game will be better without Mumbo. And yeah, that's what kills this game for me. Every Jiggy seems like a marathon. And no, I don't just mean Mumbo. He's just the most guilty. Every transformation or the split up pads are also very guilty of this, and it kills the game for me. It makes every Jiggy feel like they have like 5 more extra steps that they just don't need. They're not fun, they don't add challenge. It's just busy work. Like for example, you need to be Banjo for the first step, then Kazooie alone for the second step, and then Mumbo for the next step, and congratulations, you're a third of the way through a Jiggy. I'm not even exaggerating, I actually described a real Jiggy in this game. Seemingly every Jiggy, heck, every collectible has 5 too many steps in this game. So yeah, I may have praised the transformations and split up abilities, but that's because I genuinely believe they can be handled well, but too frequently they're just not. The original Banjo-Kazooie only ever had 2 forms you could possibly be, so Jiggies were never all that complex and didn't require you to go back to the same spot multiple times. Banjo-Tooie has a whopping 5, and that means more room for tedium. Yes, warp pads are a thing in this game, and I don't even want to think about how much worse this problem would be if they weren't a thing, but they don't suddenly mean these tedious steps aren't any less common or really any fun at all. They just mean I don't want to choke on a Yumbly as much. The sad thing is, when I'm playing one of the earlier levels or just a string of missions that don't have this problem, I found myself genuinely having a great time. Banjo-Tooie has so many amazing things going for it, many of which I haven't even brought up yet. Like, I love how the levels are interconnected. It makes it feel more like one big world than any other game. It provides for some very interesting Jiggies. Quite a few Jiggies in this game requires you to go to more than one level to fully complete an objective, and though that can contribute to the whole every Jiggy feels like a marathon thing, but I can't deny that's a cool idea that can be executed well. The first instance of this would be in the first level, Mayhem Temple. There's a part where you need to sneak into a cave, and much later you learn that was actually a small section of the level Pterodactyl Land. That's so cool! Or how about the part where you need to cool off the boiling water in HALFIRE peaks by knocking down the living ice cube from Cloud Cuckoo Land. This and the sheer amount of moves you need to learn does mean there's a decent amount of backtracking in this game for pretty much any collectible. I mostly don't mind this too much, but there are a lot of instances where you need to do this, and it gets hard to remember how many Jiggies you need to go back for. I think it would have been nice if they introduced a map and the ability to mark things on it. I don't know, I suppose some might think a map would defeat the purpose of this kind of game. I personally don't. Honestly, anything to make the backtracking for collectibles or traversing these levels any easier. Remember how back in my Banjo-Kazooie video I said something like Grunchy's Lair was a little annoying to navigate because I felt like the rooms were interchangeable in too many cases? Though I used the word preceding when I meant to say the word previous. You know, the exact opposite word I wanted to use. Why do I make so many dumb mistakes in these videos? I couldn't count to 3 in my Reignited trilogy, but whatever. Anyway, back on topic. Grunchy's Lair wasn't a bad hub world at all, but it was kinda hard for me to remember what doors went to what rooms. Banjo-Tooie has the opposite problem, in that the hub world is actually really easy to remember, but the levels themselves aren't. Mayhem Temple is like the only exception. Other than that, oh boy. How am I supposed to remember what cave goes to where in Glitter Gulch Mine? Everything looks the same in Pterodactyl Land. Where do I even begin with Grunchy Industries? This level's basically a massive maze and took me an hour to get a single Jiggy because everything's locked up when you first get there. And it's a real pain finding out that one thing that isn't. After that, things started to fall into place, but it really wasn't fun getting to that point, or even after that, honestly. Grunchy Industries is easily one of my least favorite levels ever. It's full of everything I hate about this game and pretty much nothing else. It's a massive, confusing mess, and every Jiggy is an unfun marathon. I'm honestly not really a fan of any level in this game. A constant problem among all of them is the amount of empty space in them, which is especially annoying when you're a transformation that isn't particularly fast. There are teleportation pads, so it could be far worse, but I still don't see why there needs to be this much Nothing? They could have absolutely condensed these levels a lot. Despite all of that, Mayhem Temple is probably the best. I find myself legitimately enjoying that one quite a bit, because it's definitely the most free of Banjo-Tooie's issue, but that's also the first level, so of course it's going to be the simplest. The problems with Tooie become much more obvious after that, though I still kinda like Glitter Gulch Mine. Yeah, it's pretty confusing to navigate, but I can look past that when the jiggies aren't terribly annoying in this one. For the most part. Witchy World is when I stopped liking this game. This is when the problems killed the game for me, and it's partially because this happens to be the level that introduces the split up pads, which are probably the biggest contributor to this game being so draining. I feel like the idea of a crooked carnival turned into a platforming level, and I think they handle the concept pretty well. Grungy Industries may be the video game equivalent to slowly ripping out every one of your teeth, but they definitely nailed the factory feel. Each room actually feels like a room you'd see in a factory rather than just a random assortment of generic rooms. HALFIRE Peaks has a lot of the legitimately coolest areas in the game, and I love the idea of a level with a volcano and ice mountain in close proximity. Though, remember that one complaint I had with Mad Monster Mansion? The constant ghost giggle? Yeah, this is a lot worse. Cloud Cuckoo Land is a definite pain, and I swear this level's sole purpose is to annoy you as much as possible with forcing you to retraverse through the same areas over and over as either Banjo or Kazooie alone, but I love the idea of the level. It's a seemingly random assortment of junk just floating around a massive mountain, anything from a jelly castle to a trash can. This level makes absolutely no sense, but I really love it when platforming levels decide to be weird. However, this level is home to the single worst thing I've done in a video game. Canary Mary. You save this Lisa Simpson reject in the poison gas-filled mines in Glitter Gulch and race her in a minecart. The entire minigame is just mashing the X button, and I really don't like that. Mashing buttons isn't fun. I don't mind it being in games if it's only a small part of the challenge like the action commands in Paper Mario, but if that's the entire point in the minigame, that's bad. What joy am I supposed to extract from this? The one in Glitter Gulch Mine isn't that bad, thankfully, though it did cause me to publicly embarrass myself. Okay, when I first did this mission, I didn't grab the Jiggy. Instead, I waited until after I was done with the second challenge because I remember the Jiggy and Pagey spawning next to each other. This is not the case. They actually spawn on two opposite ends of the track, and I ended up asking on Twitter, the Twitter account, Bring Back Banjo, for help, and he was nice enough to quote tweet me asking his followers for help. When in reality, I was just being a moron, and I wasted their time, and I'm sorry. I genuinely feel bad about that. Give him a follow, by the way, genuinely great Twitter account. A lot of nice Banjo-Kazooie news updates and other stuff like that. Again, follow them, good account. I was also dumb enough to think I came to a dead end, so I deleted my save file. Which really sucks because now I know I was just a moron and didn't have to redo those 2 hours, but whatever. Anyway, I didn't want to do the Canary Mary challenge again, so I ended up using this crappy third-party PlayStation 1 controller I got like 7 years ago with that adapter I brought up earlier. It has a turbo button, so I think you can connect the dots on why I wanted to use it. It worked pretty well, but then the second set of Canary Mary challenges happened. Alright, time to cheat. Wait, what? Okay, so apparently that adapter I have limits how many buttons can be pressed within a second, basically making this turbo controller useless. Anyway, these two challenges actually rely on rubber band AI, so as long as you start off slow, the first one's not too bad, and I was still able to use a turbo function just to avoid fatigue. So I technically cheated, but I think my experience of the next challenge more than made up for it. Oh my god. The Cheeto Page challenge is the single worst thing I've done in a video game, and I feel like I'm a slightly worse person for having to experience this. The main problem with this challenge is Canary Mary rubber bands ridiculously hard at certain points in the track, meaning if you're going too fast, Canary Mary will go far faster than what even a human can physically do. The game punishes you for being good. You have to intentionally slow down during these points. How do you know where these points are? You don't, you just have to figure it out through trial and error. One of these points happens to be at the very end of the track, and you have no idea how many times I lost by less than half a second. The only reason I was able to beat this was because I took advantage of how the AI works by intentionally stopping for about 4 seconds before the final turn. And then immediately started mashing the hardest I've ever mashed before. If you have to take advantage of the faults in AI to beat a challenge in a video game, that's horrendous game design. I feel like this challenge is so bad that it had to have been bad on purpose. Like, the programmer behind this knew that he had the power to ruin many people's days, so he did. At least I'm more willing to believe that than anyone actually thinking this is a fun and fair challenge, because it's not at all. This took me 2 hours to finish. 2 hours. And if that much wasted recording time wasn't enough, this actually made my arm incredibly sore the next day. I woke up at like 3 a.m. with this really strong pain in my right arm's muscles, and I just couldn't go back to sleep. I had to deal with this pain for like another 10 hours, and I got to a point where I wrapped around a heating pad on my arm, and it helped, but it also meant I was kind of stuck in my bed unless I was okay with experiencing pain. And that sucked. It was not a positive experience in the slightest, and I could easily say no other video game has given me long-lasting physical pain. Brief physical pain, sure. Physical pain that lasted 10 hours? No. And Why? Why is this in the game? Yes, I am very bad at button mashing, I'm not particularly strong, and this challenge is far easier once you know how to abuse her AI. But no video game should have the ability to do something like that to someone. Oh yeah, and all of this for a single Cheeto page. Yeah, when I said this. But I always 100% games like this because I feel wrong otherwise. I meant it! So yeah, Canary Mary is the worst thing ever, and I wish I let her suffocate in the mines. At least the hub world in this game is pretty good. I like the idea of a whole new area just slightly outside of Spiral Mountain from the first game. The Isle of Hags is just a lot more interesting than Grunchy's Lair. Everything stands out far more, so the layout is easier to remember. I like how they block off later areas by needing you to obtain certain moves. I think that's a lot more interesting than just having a door with a number on it. And I really love Spiral Mountain in this game. I've always been a big fan of the idea of taking an area from a previous game and just destroying it. It's not something I see often, and I think this is probably the best example of that happening. Though I guess the only other examples I can think of would be Glimmer from that one Mist Awakened demo from back when it was still a Spyro fan game, and I guess Green Hill from Sonic Forces. I did it in a Mario Maker level once. Why isn't this done more often? I love how the destruction created new areas, or how you can enter that one cave you can only see in the background from the original game, and I really love how you can enter a little bit of Grunchy's lair. It's horribly destroyed so you can't go far in, but still it's so cool to see it back. You even have to go back there a few times, which is something the original Spiral Mountain didn't make you do. Like, you just got the empty honeycomb pieces and there, you're done, never have to go there again. Banjo-Tooie is not like that at all. It has you go back for a bunch of things, including like things like Jinjos or whatever. I think my favorite thing they have you backtrack for is this fish. It's stuck under a rock and you have to bring it back to the water, and it'll upgrade your swimming speed and how long you can hold your breath. I love this because it's Banjo's goldfish from the file select from the first game. The fact that they made a side quest based off of something like that is incredible. I also really love how they managed to take Spiral Mountain's theme from the first game and somehow make it depressing. The music in this game is actually pretty good, but I don't think it's nearly as strong as the first game's soundtrack. That game had earworm after earworm after earworm. Banjo-Tooie really only had a few songs that stood out for me. Every song fits Banjo just fine, I just didn't find myself getting this music stuck in my head nearly as often. Though, to be fair, I do have far more experience with the first game, so that could very well be why. Looking back, I think my favorite level theme would be Mayhem Temple. It's really catchy and has Mumbo doing a cappella, so that's pretty great. I don't know why, but Grunchy Industries has one of the few songs that actually got stuck in my head hours after recording that day's session. And I know it's a good song, but it didn't really stand out to me much while playing the game, so I don't know why that happened. I mean, I guess I can make the easy joke and say it's because I was stuck in that level for hours, but it first got stuck in my head when I very briefly visited a level through that pipe in Jolly Roger's Lagoon, and I was only there for a couple minutes, so yeah, that's not it. this game does with the boss music, they just take the level themes and remix them to better fit the fights. That's basically what the first game did for the final boss, and I'm very much a fan of it, especially Mr. Patch's theme. In fact, it's easily my favorite song in the game. Too bad the actual boss fights suck. Yeah, the bosses in this game are really not great. Mr. Patch is basically just flying around very easy to avoid attacks while beak bombing into one of his patches to deflate him. Cool idea for a boss, but it's just not fun. Lord Wu Fak is pretty much the same thing except you're underwater and the fight takes like 20 minutes. Yeah, this is one of the most drawn out and unfun fights I've done in my entire life. It's not even hard, it's just boring. Oh, and he bleeds actual blood. I don't know how to segue into that because it's not really related to anything, I just felt like I should mention it. I kinda liked how Halefire Peaks had an ice and fire dragon fight. That's kinda cool and fits the level's theme. I mean, it's still not fun, but it's a cool idea. Target Zan is okay. Okay, I liked Weldar, which is weird because he comes from the worst level in the game, but he has some attacks that actually take skill to avoid, and the way you defeat him is kinda cool. Not a hard fight at all still, but a decent one at least. I wasn't even a big fan of the final boss. Once you have at least 75 Jiggies, you can finally go to Cauldron Keep to stop Bob to save bottles and King Jingling. But first, another quiz show. I like this one a lot more than the first game, specifically because there's no questions that vary from playthrough to playthrough. You're competing with Grunchy's two sisters in this one, and this time around, whoever has the lowest score by the end of the round dies. I mean, I guess I appreciate Grunchy playing fair and not just crushing Banjo and Kazooie just because she can definitely do that instead of crushing her own sisters. I don't know, it's kind of confusing to me that Grunchy's playing fair, but whatever. As you can see, it's not very hard. Anyway, once that's done, Banjo-Kazooie reverse Bob's actions to bring Bottles and Jingling back to life. I love how Bottles tries in vain to convince his wife that he's been dead while she forces him to eat his overcooked dinner. Anyway, Banjo-Kazooie go up to the top of the castle to take on Grunchy once more. This fight's alright. This time around, Grunchy is in a tank, and most of the fight is just avoiding whatever attacks she throws at you. I like how this fight uses clockwork eggs in a pretty creative way, and I especially love how Grunchy has even more quiz questions, and instead of just hurting you when you fail a question, her attacks become harder to avoid. That's some pretty cool things in this fight. It's not bad, it's just disappointing when you compare it to the first game's final boss, which was really great. I guess my problem with this is the theme song that plays isn't all that memorable when you compare it to the first games, and the fight kinda stays the same throughout while the original had like 4 different phases. Oh, and of course there's no Ginginator, and you know, that deducts at least 5 points. Again, it's not that it's a bad fight, I don't really have any major issue with it, it's just that the original had so much more to it, so it's kinda disappointing when you compare it to this game's. Anyway, once that's done, Banjo-Kazooie go to Bottles' place for a party, before realizing that the party is over because Klungo ate all of the pizza. Oh yeah, Klungo is a good guy now and he wants to pursue game development. Anyway, after a bit of disappointment, they have the idea to play a game of hacky sack with Grunchy's now decapitated head. Grunchy then does the most evil thing any antagonist has ever done and gives millions of children false hope. I'm actually still not done. There's a multiplayer mode, and I couldn't record it. I only have one controller, but I remember it being a lot of fun from when I played the game on the N64, like, probably 9 years ago at this point. It's mostly just the mini-games you've been seeing throughout the whole game, but now in multiplayer. But the real star of the show will be the first-person shooter game. That's the one that I love playing forever ago. You can play as a bunch of different characters including Banjo, Grunchy, and even a Jinjo. All of them with their own unique stats, like Grunchy is an absolute tank and can take a ton of damage, but is very slow, but the Jinjo is incredibly fast but dies in only a few hits. It's basically GoldenEye's multiplayer, even with the same awkward control scheme in the N64 version, but the XBLA version updated to have more modern controls. There's a few other things the XBLA version changed or added, like in the original game, Kazooie mentions Mario by name here, but this being an Xbox game, they changed her dialogue to that well-known Italian gentleman. They kept the N64 on the title screen though, kinda weird, but they also added a copy of Nuts and Bolts for whatever reason. Other than that, most of the changes the XBLA port of the first game had still apply. The main and honestly only major reason why you should play this over the original is because of the vastly improved frame rate. I mean, look at this. Oh yeah, they also gave you the ability to look at a list of Jiggy hints for every level, which is really helpful. So all that extra stuff is super nice and very much appreciated, but the frame rate is like the only real reason why I highly recommend playing this over the original. I have mixed opinions on this game, to say the least. I love a lot of things about this game, but like I said in the beginning of the video, not the right things. The Jiggies, man. The fact that there's such a marathon ruins the game for me, and that really sucks. I'm genuinely sad I can't enjoy this game because there's so many things I adore. So many things that no other game does. Out of any 3D platformer I've ever played, this one easily feels most like an adventure. But I just can't like it. And I hate that fact. I love Banjo-Kazooie so much, but the sequel, I just can't. I can't. Ugh. That being said, that is just my opinion. I know that plenty of people out there can actually look past the Jiggies being a marathon. Heck, maybe they even like it, I don't know. And because of that, this is one of their favorite games ever, and I can completely understand why. Again, this game does so many things no other platformer does, and I can't help but respect it for that. And I even kind of love it to some extent, but again, the Jiggies ruin it. But if you're the right kind of person, the Jiggies won't ruin it, and because of that, I do kind of actually recommend this game to an extent, despite my negative review. Because if you're the right kind of person, you could adore this game. And if you played Banjo-Kazooie through Rare Replay, you already have Banjo-Tooie, so just go for it then. Though if you played it through the 360 or N64, maybe don't play this one though. That means you're gonna have to buy the game separately, but even then, it still might be worth a shot. Might be, because, again, I can't emphasize this enough, if you're the right kind of person, you will adore this game, and I do think it's worth a shot because of it. I just hate the fact I'm not the right kind of person. Anyway, I guess I'm done with Banjo for now. I'll get back to the series eventually, I don't know when though. But there is a certain spiritual successor that came out a couple years ago that has very divisive opinions, to say the least. So I guess I'll see you guys next time when I review Yooka-Laylee. Bye.